Hey, this is Boaz. Thanks for showing up. Please visit the Fools and Sages podcast at foolsandsagespodcast.com. There are no spaces and it's all spelled out. You can find show notes, references, bios, merch, and other cool features. Contact us if you have feedback or a question, if you want to appear on the show, or if you want either or both of us to be a guest on your podcast. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and anywhere else great podcasts are found. And follow us on X and Instagram. Support us on Patreon. The Patreon link's also in our website. And thank you. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the Fools and Sages podcast, where we talk about tools for making sense and meaning in turbulent times. I'm Boaz. I've been a founder and executive in renewable energy businesses for about 25 years, and now I work with organizations on the quality of their thinking and collaboration.
And I'm Brian. I'm an artist, a teacher, a therapist, and a backyard philosopher.
Cool. So in today's episode, Brian, I thought we would recover some territory that we've spent some time in already, in order to kind of make it clearer, more explicit. So there's a topic that's come up in a few of our conversations that's about the you call it the semantic universe. And I think another way of talking about that is there's an objective universe and a subjective universe, or I think that's what you mean by semantic, is that our perception of universe is framed by the limitations of our consciousness, and those are developing, right? Those are changing. But maybe you can talk a little more about what that term means to you, and maybe how it applies to some of the ideas we've been kicking around.
Sure. Yeah, I think the place where I took that languaging from, I might have mentioned before, is Joe Chilton Pierce and his out of his series of The Crack in the Cosmic Egg. And but if you look at the roots of a lot of important, I guess, mystical traditions, you would see that there is an understanding of two separate elements to the human experience. Um, there is humans in our development. We make use of language, which means that we label things. We use those names and labels as ways to manipulate, as ways to predict. Right? If we have a word model of the universe, we can do certain manipulations in that word universe, like solve a math problem and know how far a distance is from one distance to another by making manipulations in our head and translating it across. But if we, and that's what I would call the semantic universe. It's the universe that is created by our thought, the model of the universe, if you will, that we use to manipulate things. And the way that this has been popularly talked about is with the mind as a filtering device. So the popular way this gets presented is if we were bombarded by that we are in fact bombarded by all this information, and that we have to do a filtering process to decide what is relevant to us, what should be included in our calculations, and what can safely be disregarded. And some explanations of this say it's a reaction to a hostile environment, of nature. Um, so that semantic reality we tend to inhabit, and there is a danger of us losing touch with the actual reality, the things that we cannot put our hands on linguistically. Uh, so, for example, in the very beginning of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu tells us the Tao which can be spoken is not the true Tao. So, right away, the first message we get from him out of the Tao Te Ching is basically saying your mental spoken map is not reality. The names which can be given are not the true names. In other words, there is some, the reality that you're experiencing is different than the ultimate reality of the Tao. Uh, so when we talk about the semantic reality, we're talking about the reality that we spend an awful lot of time in, uh, in a way that how can I get at the relevance of this? Okay, anything that happened yesterday lives in the semantic world. Anything that hasn't happened yet, but that you have a conceptualization of happening, lives in the semantic world. Your fears for the future live in the semantic world. Your negative reactions to things that have happened in the past and your good reactions to things that have happened in the past, they are part of your semantic world. When Lao Tzu says the five colors blind the eye, the five notes deafen the ear, what he's talking about is when we overlay this semantic model in our experiencing of reality, we stop seeing things that we don't have semantic distinctions for. And we stop, our language model starts mediating reality for us in a way that your dog and your cat don't. So that's kind of what the implications of this semantic world are.
Cool. Um, that's a great introduction, and it brings up some questions for me. I think maybe starting with there's obviously a lot of focus in the last few years on misinformation and disinformation. And your comment about what happened in the past is part of the semantic universe um, makes me think there's a slippery slope there too, in the kind of postmodern direction that, well, facts don't really exist, right? And certainly it's a related statement, right? That what happened in the past isn't part of the material universe that we can experience today. And yet, there's something about staying connected to um, a literal past that has to go through this semantic filter. Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, that the landscape is much more complicated than the model in this case. Um, when we talk about the semantic world, we're also talking about the world that culture builds for us. And in the time of Joseph Chilton Pierce, um, there was kind of a postmodernist reaction happening in psychology, and there was this idea that when we get this cultural download, when we are acculturated, which happens. Uh, I mean, there's some very interesting questions around that. Happens when language takes on certain roles. Happens when the brain spheres start to distinguish in their roles. Um, so there was sort of a vogue to want to say that all the negative things that happen in the world happen because humans are under the influence of negative enculturation, and so there was an impulse to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that at the same time we can go back to things like Carl Jung and some of his when we look at the tradition of dream interpretation or interpreting mythology, some of the Golden Bough and Fraser stuff, and Carl Jung, and the idea of the collective unconscious. All these things live in a semantic world. And so I'm not so quick to put the baby out with the bathwater. I think that within this, the semantic elements of our culture are a lot of clues to who we are, in terms of when we spoke before, that each human is born in a room, borrowed from Jan Cox, born in a room with their foot nailed down, and the room is on a particular street, in a house on that street, in a street in that city, et cetera, et cetera. And so enculturation is inescapable, and we could not really navigate. I think there's some interesting research about autism and some of the things that might be going on with the brain that translate reality a little differently. But I think there's a lot of clues there, and I wouldn't want to throw it all out. I mean, that's my first thought, and there's some good spelunking to be done in it.
And so yeah, there are implications kind of on both sides of that, right? One is that the literal universe, which I'm using as um the corollary to the semantic universe. I don't know if you were using literal also, but
Uh-huh.
the literal universe is meaningful because of our filtering of it through culture, etc. Or we create meaning through that filtration process. And on the other side of things, just because the literal universe no longer exists the moment time moves on from it doesn't mean that there wasn't a literal universe that, let's say, casts its shadow forward still, right? That there's still a um that there's still whatever truth or literalness um existed in the present, in the past, in that moment in the past. There's still um we we shouldn't we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as you said, in terms of that didn't happen, right? There's like
Sure.
a yeah.
Right. Right. Well, and there's this question that you brought up in the beginning of your comment, was that is meaning out there, or do we find it? And I think philosophers have argued about this for quite a while, but I feel like we can trust enculturation, or like the way that we can trust some elements of enculturation. We can also trust some elements of appearances, as far as the way the 10,000 things work, to borrow from the Taoists. For example, I would say, to make this more clear, have you noticed how there are no animals that eat frumpus berries? Okay. What, you might ask me, is a frumpus berry? And I would have to honestly answer, I have no idea, because it doesn't exist. Right. So now, if the human mind, which is an argument actually interesting that Federico Fagin was making, if the human mind has a quest for knowledge and a quest for meaning, is it possible that there is no such thing? Are we, birds trying to live off of frumpus berries when there's no such thing as a frumpus berry? It seems unlikely. It seems like, if the universe has endowed us, however created we might have been, if we're endowed with this capacity to seek and find meaning, I intuitively want to, suspect that there's going to be meaning out there to be found.
I do think there's an argument, um, but I can't make it, and I can't say you just won it either. About be, because seek meaning and derive meaning from existence, meaning exists. Um, I mean, it might not be that different from I think, therefore I am ultimately, and end up in a circular argument, right? I agree, right? I find this experience not only meaningful, but downright miraculous. Like this is really cool, right?
And its experiential nature defies the mapping entirely by the semantic universe. You know, the 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 philosophers now, for example, have this idea. They use the term qualia, which Fajin mentions, and which is the idea of something that just can't be communicated or put into words. It's just the ultimate subjective thing, and that your being there experiencing it is a significant thing. Touching back to the conversation we had about how for the universe to universe right, it has to you, and that's why it has done exactly that. Um, so this is a he sort of builds the physics underneath that, but uh, but so yeah, there is something about the interdependence of the object of perception and the perceiver, and that's part of this new quantum idea is that they can't really be separated, right?
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything more, I don't know, conclusive is too strong a word, but more directional we can say about how we treat the past, knowing that it's living entirely in the semantic universe.
Right.
Is there, like, what about that?
Well, there's a lot about that. Um, in fact, I think it's fair to say there's dimensions to that. For example, within the discipline of neurolinguistic programming, which was hip back in the day, uh, there was this understanding that humans generalize, delete, and distort their experience. We know now, for example, that in legal cases, eyewitnesses are not the greatest sources of information, certainly when compared to a video. Um, at the same time, we have this phenomenon that I thought was pretty interestingly, kudos to I can't think of his name, but the book is called the body keeps score. The body keeps the score, and basically it talks about how our history has impacted us neurophysiologically as well as psychologically as well as psychospiritually in all of these levels. And so that there is some aspect on that level in the interconnection between um, awareness, consciousness, and the vehicle that we inhabit, the body. Um, there is some impact of history. And that does sort of imply, I mean, my experience is that there is stuff to be worked out on that level. Yeah, which is really an interesting and bizarre topic. I don't know if we want to go there now, but one great example of that is from Reichian therapy, developed by Wilhelm Reich, student of Sigmund Freud.
Go for it.
Yeah, well, basically, how to describe it is probably the best way to describe it is to tell you the story of how I encountered it. And that is, I took a class on it. I heard that this guy was a student of Freud and he was the father of body psychotherapy. And I went and I watched this introduction class about it. And I had been doing sort of an inventory of various body disciplines and therapies and coming out of my work in kung fu and later internal arts. Um, but so I took this class and she said, "Okay, who wants to get a feel for how this works?" So I popped my hand up. She chose me. Okay, lay down here, take this posture, do this breathing. And then, after I'm doing this breathing a little bit, she starts to do intense body work. Now remember Ida Rolf, if you know Rolfing, Ida Rolf was a student of Wilhelm Reich's also. So she starts doing this very intense body work uh, with pressure right on the cheekbone underneath my eyes. And I'm still doing this breathing. And in a very short time, like an impressively short time, we're talking, under maybe 4 or 5 minutes, maybe not even, uh, I have a flashback that and when I say flashback, I mean it's not just a memory. I am energetically back in the condition of when I was a young child, probably beginning to speak, and somehow I needed to cry, but big boys don't cry. And I was in that, what do they call that classically? A double bind situation. Physiologically, I need to cry. Culturally, within the semantic world, I'm not supposed to cry because the definition of big boy is that big boy doesn't cry. See the conflict already between the semantic world and the world of my physiology. Well, so what happened is you want to cry through this segment, and my jaw, the muscle group of my jaw was the body segment that was in the double bind situation. And if you can remember back in the day when you were a little kid, you can see it if you watch a child that's fighting to not cry, your jaw is vibrating up and down. And I was in this energetic condition, identical to when I had been that age, to when I was in that cultural, emotional double bind situation that brought the memory back. So that's a great example of how the body keeps score and how energy moves through the body and how impacts historical events in our psychosocial development can have impacts that we carry through. And then I ended up going through this whole therapy and being trained how to do it. I never did really practice that, but as a result of going through the the therapy, it got to the point where you could put as much pressure as you wanted on this cheekbone, and there's nothing more in there to come out. You know, and I think there were things that I did before this therapy that helped me go through it quickly. This lady said she'd never seen anybody go through as quickly. But also, I think having gone through this therapy was a preparatory thing to some of the experiences that I had later. Um,
I think
so
that
so it that's history on a number of dimensions, if that helps.
yeah. Well, that I think we might be going to the same place because you're when you said what a great example this was of the semantic universe, the belief that big boys don't cry, conflicting with the literal universe of your physiology. It reminded me of the body really being a medium between the literal and the semantic and the objective and the subjective to a great extent. And it reminds me of something we've talked about before, which is how in the realm of shamanism, having a body is a huge advantage when you are encountering disembodied psychic material. And I think that might be an interesting one to unpack in this context a little bit too.
Uh, yeah. Wow. To understand that universe is tricky stuff. Um, to well, first of all, only half of our brain uses language. And we have for example, I think I mentioned this before, the Zen master hits people with a stick. Uh, the The pain of getting hit with the stick is what the philosophers would call a qualia. It's like, yeah, you can say hit with a stick, but there is no equivalent to the sensation of being hit with a stick. So when we talk, there's a lot of things that we have models of in the semantic universe that don't translate to what you're calling the literal universe. Um, as long as we understand the universe, literal meaning the one that you can hit your head on, and not literal in the sense of
As in
that there's something's
literary.
been
Is
written
there a
about it.
better word than literal that we should use?
Well, it's the world of physics,
Yeah, yeah, the
of real
mechanical
stuff.
universe, the
Yeah, the
material
world of
universe?
real stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tangible universe, the manifest universe, I think it gets called at some point.
Okay.
Um, but so, there's Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." And while I don't say that what he said is not true, he's wrong in two important ways, at least. I used to think it was just in one important way, but now I've understood that it's two important ways. So I'm leaving the door open for three. Um, but anyway, the first obvious important way is the I that thinks is not the only I that is. There is this whole other half of extension that is, you might call it the body brain, you might call it the, the element of our extension as a self that inhabits the brain without the half of the brain without language. Um, and so we have all of that realm of experience that we can't think it directly through language because language hasn't gone there yet. Uh, but then we also have the section where language tries to go, but it doesn't go like a scientist. It goes like a poet. It goes like Dante went to hell, right? It goes like the myths explore the underworld of human consciousness. And that's beyond thought, but in a different direction. It's not in the direction of the unspeakable, like the body exists in, but instead it's in the direction of the collective, but still not tangible, not a collective physical body, but a collective psycho-mental body that Jung termed the collective unconscious. That has been with us one way or the other, but shown up in myth and shown up in dreams and shown up in works of fiction like that. So does that does that help at least lay out a little map of the territory?
I think that's, um, barely scratching the surface. Yes, it's a good start in terms of the a broader understanding of the self, right? And the relationship of the self to the collective and the relationship of the self to the observer that is also a self.
Right, the self that predicates in words and manipulates things, the self that tries to get fulfillment in non-speakable realms through attempting semantic efforts. Uh, we try to find things in the most general sense through the semantic map, but some of those things can't be found in the semantic map. And in fact, trying to access the semantic map is the thing that keeps that door shut. And that's where shamanism comes in. That's where religious experience comes in, all
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Big
So
door there. Big, big door with
so we have to expound on that a little bit because we got there maybe the hard way. Um, so so I think it would be helpful to explain the statement. There are things on the semantic map that can't be understood um, through through language. I think that's what you said.
Uh, no, no. There are things in the non-semantic world that can't translate to the semantic world,
Okay.
and there are things in the semantic world that aren't sourced from a personal level, but they're sourced from a collective level. But that concept of semantic means that it can be captured and therefore manipulated by words primarily.
Okay.
So
So
yeah.
so what is the connection that you just made to religion and shamanism? Because I think there was a leap there that I don't think I quite grasped either.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. If we want to go to the Christian tradition, before Saint Anselm, you had I'm trying to think of what Saint Augustine, I think I'm thinking of. And some of those early saints in the church, they said things like, and I believe this is a direct quote, I think of Augustine, I believe it because it is absurd. Or in some of the creeds, they talk about a peace that passes all understanding. Um, or, there is this idea that the world of God is primarily accessible to saints and to people that experience a very special kind of grace. Um, so there is a level on which things don't make sense. And I when I was an undergraduate, I wrote a whole paper about this. And in physics, we have this idea called the zone of middle dimensions. And in the zone of middle dimensions, everything makes what we've come to rely on as common sense. But when we try to go way up in scale or way down in scale, if we try to look at things like the speed of light, then we get results that make no sense. If you look at the quantum mechanics and the quantum folks, I think it was Heisenberg or one of those guys that said, we never really figured it out. We just sort of fell into the spirit of the thing. So the idea is that when we get outside of the zone of middle dimensions, things don't make the same kind of sense. I'm not saying that they don't make sense, but I'm saying that they make a different kind of sense. We have to make a certain, translation, and we can see that that translation is a sort of a consistent thing across traditions because there is that movement. I think that's behind the Zen idea of moving you out of the world of words with a good smack. What's counsel? Eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, pass water when you have to. Those are not elements of the semantic world. Those are elements of the real world. And I mean real like you were using literate, the world you hit your head on. Uh, when the Zen masters ask, what is Zen? He's weighing flax, and his answer is 3 pounds of flax. So there's this idea to bring us back to the actual experience. And that's dovetails into why I think it's important at certain ages for people to have physical training, physically moving the body for brain development. And also I think it's important why it's why I recommend that people will have a great advantage if they live in a natural environment because of the effects that these things are going to have on your brain physiologically. It's not going to translate directly to things you're thinking, but it will translate indirectly to those things. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So I don't think we got back to my original question, and we might need to work up to it, but let me put it out there again.
Mhm.
And I think you originally said this to me some whatever 25 years ago, that having a body, having a physical body, was an advantage in dealing with um, disembodied psychic material, or in the realm of shamanism.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm relating that to the other statement that you made about, the semantic world being in conflict with the real world of your physiology, right? The semantic world of the belief system about big boys don't cry, and the, um, real world, reality of your physiology were in conflict, right? And so that just made me think of the body as a medium for this
Right.
conflict to live, right? This conflict might not exist if we didn't have bodies. I don't know. And so that made me think of the body as an advantage in the psychic realm. And so I'm
Yeah.
wondering if those connections are meaningful to you, or if there's more to say about why having a body is an advantage.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole there's a there's lots to say because yeah, when we talk about the body being an advantage when in conflict with other psychic elements, the root of that is because the body can generate energy. And um to understand why that's important, we have to look a little bit at the different uses of language. We're used to using language in a relatively mundane way, but if we look at language in a more in a much more expanded dimension, and by that I'm going all the way back to the beginning of the gospel in arche hologos in Greek. In the beginning was the word. Um, There is some other ways, like, sometimes I've done weddings for people, and what I like to point out is that a wedding ceremony is a different kind of speaking. It's using language in a different way that is declaratory, okay? When I am using, let's call it language, in say, a ceremonial sense, and I'm trying to affect something on that other level that happens in, let's say, a psychodynamic level that ceremonies happen on. And there's just so much to explain to know what that means, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah, one
um,
one piece at a time, I think, is the only way.
exactly. Then what's happening here is it's not just that I have a thought, right? Everybody has a thought. But when a shaman has thought or a traditional ceremonial magician, what they're doing is they're taking that thought and they're bundling it up with energy and they're sending it off somewhere. The way that the average human does this is, if you're familiar with it or you've ever been taught it, is through prayer, right? If you think about it, you're taking an emotional package and you're bundling it up and you're giving it a linguistic vehicle and you're projecting that in a way that's different. You're using language and you're relating to it psychologically differently than if you're telling somebody don't let the cat out, right? Maybe that's a bad example if you really, really, really love your cat, but uh, if you tell somebody you can't find your socks, right? So uh, there's something different that of a thought form that's bundled with an energy package, and that bundling, generation and packaging and bundling with an energy package, it there's advantages to having a body to generating that energy and then sending it off. If you look at Crowley, it's a kind of a oblique reference, but he's giving counsel to white magicians, and he says, "Inflame thyself." Well, the reason he says "inflame thyself" is because he knows that whatever that thought form is, it's going to have more punch the more psychic energy is put behind it. And psychic energy is emotional energy. It's not just conceptual thought form. And on that realm, this is a currency. This is a fuel, like that. So, did that start to get in there? I mean, I know there's just
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of territory to cover there.
Let's play with that just a little bit because the idea of packaging a thought form with energy,
Mhm.
I can relate to, and in particular, I can relate to it taking energy to stay present and focused and organized, um, psychically or mentally, under duress, right? That in particular, I can relate to. That takes a combination of energy and um, attention.
Say more about duress.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm referring to is when we're um, when we use plant medicine, say mushrooms or ayahuasca or something like that, it makes more evident the amount of distraction that we deal with on a continuous basis, because it kind of turns up the volume on a lot of that distraction, and also can make it apparent that there are certain types of distraction that require certain types of um, attention to avoid. Is that
Yeah.
helpful?
I mean, as a primer, um, these things are things that maybe have to be learned in specific and in experience as opposed to conceptually. But as you might imagine, not only in shamanism, but in a lot of elements, aspects, situations, um, it turns out that controlling your own mind is a huge thing. Uh, in kung fu, we have this thing we call eating bitter, which means that you have to do so. You want to make yourself sweat because if you sweat now, you'll bleed less later. Is the idea. But you don't wanna do it. There's gonna be unpleasantness. That unpleasantness is gonna start an internal dialogue around it, and you're gonna have to which is part of that semantic dimension of things, and you're basically gonna have to shut that down, push yourself through because you want a result out in, the reality that you hit your head on, right? So, um so focus is super important. And I think that there's just there's just so much going on here. There's a kind of taxonomy about these different things that might try to pull you one way or the other, and that is there's a whole conversation that I would label all the voices in your head are not your voices. Um,
Yeah,
but
and don't believe everything you think goes hand in hand
don't
with
believe
that.
everything you think
Yeah.
or everything that tries to think you, right?
Yeah.
And then and then there are learning certain things that are again another form of using the power of word to protect yourself in that psychodynamic dimension. And Tibetan Buddhists use mantra the same way. It isn't just that you're saying, Om Tara Tu Tara Tori Svaha, Om Tara Tu Tara Tori Svaha, Om Tara Tu Tara. You're There is a corresponding aspect of your attention that goes along with that to make you unshakable, right? And so this is something that you have to learn how to do through push-ups and through life because the nature of this duress when we're in a ceremony we see it as something other. When we're in life it disguises itself as all sorts of things, which
Yeah, yeah, usually as stories we're telling ourselves that we're falling for left and right,
yeah.
if we haven't done those push-ups. I was gonna ask a question though about this kind of mental model you have around, emotional energy, being combined with attention. I can absolutely relate to it, but my mental model of it is a little different. So where I am unshakable in the shamanic context is when I'm having this experience of being in the moment, meaning at the front of the wave of time, where time is moving through the universe, creating the universe, or co-creating with the universe, however you want to look at that, right? So there's a wave, and if we're at the front of it, um, we can be unshakable, and if we're a millimeter behind, we're swept along with it and at its mercy. And so there's like a dropping of thought and just becoming a channel that I've done push-ups with enough to get into that, and there's also a trance state associated with that, where, with Ikaro, which is a song, from an ayahuasca ceremony that I think is very similar to a mantra in ways, that gives us a vehicle for a trance state in a particular way. It does other things too,
Right.
but it gives us a vehicle for a trance state so we can be at the front of that wave and unshakable. And at the front of the wave, all of this noise just flies by, right? All of the duress just flies by. It can't stick. It's only when we're thinking and therefore subject to our thoughts being manipulated that duress manifests. And I haven't thought about being at the front of the wave as expending emotional energy or sending emotional energy somewhere before. And I wonder if you can relate to what I'm describing and connect those together, or if it's just too subjective at this point.
Well, it's always difficult to come back and flatten out into language what's going on. Um, it's interesting though because there is, you've definitely got an aspect of elements that have a certain amount of free will that they're exercising in your direction in that setting. And yeah, I mean, how you ward that off, there's a lot of different, and this is like the all the colors of the rainbow of shamanism. And it definitely has to do with how much ballast there is in your boat, how and some of this builds with time. Some of it I think is cosmic, like your bigger relationship to the whip and the carrot, right? Fear and desire. And these are all aspects of the semantic universe. And but the way that these things work, just because I know this is just probably so airy fairy and out there, and it's hard maybe for some people to get an idea what we're talking about. But um uh we're talking pretty much, although it's maybe not exclusively the realm, it's maybe most predictably the realm of South American shamanism and the use of plant medicines. And there are certain things that are very predictable about that experience if you're doing it in a certain ceremonial setting. And that is one of the things that we both have some in-depth experience in. And so that's where this conversation comes from. And but when I was very much at the beginning of this training, and I was in Peru, and I was sitting next to Maestro Corendero, uh, and he had just come back from a trip, and so there were a lot of people that wanted to see him, and so he loaded up this ceremony with probably, I don't know, like 40 people or so, and uh, things started to go crazy in the beginning, as they will. And I started getting impressions in my mind's eye from a very certain side of the room, impressions like Polaroid snapshots in my mind's eye of hands missing fingers, of stumps of limbs, of mutilated, bodies, and it was clearly something that was just trying to freak me out. But a psychic thing, this is not in the realm of me playing games with myself psychically. This is something that came from a place in the room, and I could feel it come from there. And I made the mistake internally with my attention of saying, "What?" And as soon as I did that, made myself open my consciousness to what is this thing out here casting me these images? Boom, it was on me like thick. And I'm sitting next to Jorge on my Astro, and I don't say a word. I'm just like getting rat packed. He's sitting next to me. He feels this. He understands what's happening. He touches my left thigh. I'm sitting on his right side, that is, as we're looking out, and all the stuff was coming from the right side of the room. And in that instant, boom, all the stuff has backed off. And had easy riding the whole rest of the night. And then the next day in the river, I asked him, what was that about? And he said, "Oh, you let your attention go. You just need to keep it on that Icaro and just keep singing that Icaro and just keep your attention with that like you're rowing a boat across a big lake,
Yeah.
you know?" And that's about discipline of the mind. That's about who is the master of your consciousness. Is it you, or is it anything that can come along and punk on you and send you off into the shrubs, right? So that's kind of the beginning of what's going on, and I'm using that as an example of it, that Icaro is semantic. I mean, we're singing words, not always, but and those words do have associations, but we're not using them the way we use words when we ask somebody to pick up a loaf of bread at the store, right? We're using those words in declaratory ways. We're using them in shamanic ways, and that's interestingly, while we do talk sometimes, we usually sing. And when we talk about someone being the subject of a magic spell, we say they were enchanted. That canta, to sing. And what's interesting about that is that singing lives in the other side of the brain, I'm pretty sure, from regular language, which is why sometimes people can sing things when they have trouble speaking. So we're clear. The fact that there's patterns and there's rhythms, the fact that these rhythms can live in your body in a kinesthetic way is all like a little signal that we're engaging that other half of the brain. We're not just sitting doing a conceptual thing. There's something that's holistic in the use of the nervous system in that setting.
Yeah. So my my original question there was how how do you interpret the packaging of emotional energy with attention, with a thought, and sending it somewhere, which is something that I can relate to, but is a minority of my experience with shamanism, compared with what you just said of keeping the attention on the Ikaro, rowing the boat across the ocean, trusting that everything is going to work out the way it needs to work out and not being distracted by all of the possible thoughts that could come up, including my own that I might imagine I would package with emotional energy and send somewhere. Like I don't do that a
Right.
whole lot, right? I mean there are times, but usually I'm just rowing the boat. And
Mhm.
how does that show up for you?
Um Well, that's kinda like my second ceremony, I guess, with Jorge, that, after we had gone through that first one, and, he said, "Just don't, uh, open your mind to it, stay with the Icaro, and, then, it's all gonna work out." So, I was like, "Okay, great." So, we had another ceremony the very next night. He usually would only do them 2 nights a week, but this time because he'd been away, the list was so long of people that wanted his intervention that, again, we had another room full. And, the way these usually go is, they give everybody their cup of medicine, and then the lights go out and the song starts. And with a big room, that can take a while to get all the medicine distributed, if you've got 35 or 40 people. Um,
So
so
the people
s
who were early in the circle are feeling it before the lights go out.
It can be, it can be. Although what's strange here is that it's really when the curandero begins and starts calling things that the real show starts. You may hear the orchestra tuning up, but you're not gonna see the show until he lets it out of park and puts it in drive. And that's another one of the mysteries of this, right? I mean, this whole tradition is la maravilla del mundo, the marvel of the world. But the fact that the curandero can affect the consensual experience of people in the room, that's like that you need another model of how things work to understand that. There's no. You and I both had plenty of experiences to know that that's not overstating the case, not by a long shot. And so what happened was we got everybody with their medicine, and the lights were out, and the Icaros start. And these Icaros, they often will start with just random sounds of the jungle and little whistling and kind of clicking sounds and some bird flapping wings and stuff. And then the Icaro finally starts, and often things get very heavy very fast in that early stage. The way Jorge would describe it is it's like in the roller coaster when the very first hill that you start climbing, and then after that, it's gonna be the whole ride after that, but that climbing is a very intense time. And so we are in that very intense time, and Jorge's singing, and I'm singing, and on the other side of Jorge is Maria Cristina, and she's singing, and a guy across the way starts losing it, and he starts calling to Jorge, "Doctor, doctor," and Jorge tells him, "Be quiet, don't worry, you're fine, you know, go ahead, just be quiet." But the guy, he won't. And so Jorge gets up and he goes over to the guy who's sitting right in the doorway, and he sort of deals with the guy. And but when he stops singing, now it's just me and Maria, and this is a whole room of like 45 people,
Yeah.
and the maestro has just been holding back the whole flood. And we're singing this Sicaro that just feels very heavy just to keep this thing moving forward. And if I had to describe what I was feeling, it would have been like this. We're losing it. We're grabbing, but we're not really doing it here. And I look across the room. I don't say anything. We're still singing. I look across the room and I see Jorge's profile in the door. And I think to him, dude, the WTF? Like, what's going on here? What do I do? And he puts his arm up like Muhammad Ali after he just won the fight. And I see that. And so I put my arm up. And the message is like, you got to dominate this stuff, right? And so I put my arm up, and slowly but surely my head starts to clear a little bit. and I start feeling like we're pushing back on this thing, and, we rocked at Icaro for probably 25 minutes until the room feels really different, but as we start to push back, after he put his hand up, he disappears, and I just would see through the outline of the doorway the cherry of his cigarette going up and down, and, uh, and then once we finished the whole thing, he came back in and he took over the reins, and the rest of the evening went on. And then in the river the next day, he said, "Okay, last night, that was good work. That was good work." And I think I learned in that ceremony how exactly you put your will and your intent into an Icaro to work it. And now how an Icaro works, and how do you know what Icaro, and how do you know what you're trying to do with that Icaro, and all of that stuff is, that's a part of the foundations of understanding what's going on here. But the important point for today, at least, is that there is a way that this special speaking can happen that engages other elements of our psychodynamic entity than just our conceptual word machine, and that it does have to do with uh an energetic component, and I've mentioned this before, which is again is a whole nother realm, but within the Taoist internal arts, there's this idea uh of a what we call the microcosmic orbit, or the macrocosmic orbit. And it has to do with cycling through the energetic system of the main channel up the back and down the front. And so sometimes a person might have a slight rocking when they're doing that. And that tells you that there's other energetic system is sort of pumping. And that would happen when you're doing certain Taoist practices, meditation.
It
It's not
happens
that
to
big,
me when singing Ikaros. All like if I'm in that front of the wave state, in that trance state, I'm sure I'm rocking.
right? And look at the old Jewish guys at the
Yeah,
wall.
at the Wailing Wall,
And
sure.
when they're doing their deal, so what that sign is to me is that the nervous system is doing a very particular cycling, and that tells me, that within all likelihood, he's not just driving this from one brain function out of the semantic brain. This is a whole brain physiological thing, because, it's like, why say a prayer? You've said all those words before. There's no human out there listening. What's the point of it? Well, the point of it is that it serves also this psychophysiological functioning that, is necessary to get the whole human brain to work like that.
Okay. Have we done the idea of the semantic world opposed to the real world that you can hit your head on justice? Did we have we
Um
described that well enough, do you think?
I think that maybe that people have been able to get an idea for it. It's like your dog, for example. He will learn words. Like, you can train your dog to the word supper, and if you associate it with the experience, you anchor it with the experience of him eating his supper, then he will understand the word supper. But he doesn't live in the semantic world that you and I inhabit, and any human being, uh, because there's limited manipulations that he can do with those handles. He's limited in the ways that he can think about supper. Uh, he's more in an every minute experiencing mode. and humans need to be rooted in that, but we have all these other higher functions that have to kind of nest inside with that. So I think that's most of it. Uh, I think that what's interesting, maybe that we should point out, is that when people are grown up in different cultures, necessarily they have different words for things. I think the example that frequently gets used is all the words that Eskimos have for snow. So it wouldn't be incorrect to say that the universe that the Eskimos inhabit has more kinds of snow
Right.
because we don't have those distinctions,
The
so we
semantic
can't
universe that they inhabit has more kinds of snow.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so semantic universes, while they may overlap when people's human experiences overlap, they don't translate reality the same way. And that's part of cultural differences. Cultural differences aren't just, oh, these people like to eat chili and dress a certain way and live in buildings a certain way. There is something that goes along with all of that that is dimensional in a way that we can't capture. But there is a collective experience there somehow.
Yeah, I think of it as the kind of like a set of beliefs and stories that are a mix of conscious and unconscious that people have about the buildings that they live in and the food that they eat and all those things. Yeah.
And all the institutions of their semantic universe, and they likely take most of them just as ises, not as culturally specific, unless they start traveling, they start interacting with other people, and then they start pulling that nail up of that floor of their foot that's nailed down in that
In
floor.
that floor, in that
They
room, in
start
that house. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to realize that it isn't just that people that were enculturated in different systems, have different customs and they like different foods and music. They inhabit different worlds. And like I know when I learned how to speak Spanish, when it got to the point where I was dreaming in Spanish, uh, I felt that it was a different world and that it was actually a different me that inhabited that different world,
Mhm.
even though we they overlapped. And so there's definitely more than just words and labels that go on with languaging that would make us say things like in archeologos, in the beginning was the word. But in that other conversation that we had, the idea that consciousness precedes matter rather than falls as a result of it, then in archeologos makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Very
we're gonna have
nicely.
to come back to that one.
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah.
can beat a lot of dust out of that rug, I think.
Uh, I'll watch, that Fajin video, and we can talk about it together maybe next time.
Yeah, every so often you see a tear in the old fabric of things being made, and I feel like this guy is kinda part of that.
Mhm.
He's engineered part of the new world coming in, and he's thinking about it in unique and innovative ways that are part of that paradigm shift that we've spoken about before. Um,
Mm.
so yeah.
Paradigm shift will be another thing we'll come back to.
Oh
Good.
boy, yeah.
Well, let's leave it there. I hope that that kind of expounding on the semantic universe and or the semantic world and the difference between that and the real world, which we also called the literal world at some point, um, and and then our kind of foray into talking about shamanism, which I imagine we'll do more of. I hope that was interesting for folks, and yeah, we'll keep at it.
Yeah,
I'll see you. I'll see you next time. Let's
yeah.
stay
And,
on
and
and after I end the recording.
yeah. And for anyone who's still a little muddy about the difference between the semantic world and what we're calling the real world, get a friend or neighbor to hit you with an umbrella. That was the real world.
Thanks, Brian.
See you next time.